Hello and welcome. Today we will be studying animal anatomy, and in this video focusing on the specific subject of the lizard. Luckily for this video we have two specimens of leopard gecko that will help us learn a little bit about what makes these creatures tick. So to begin, we're going to be looking at the general anatomical layout of a lizard. So we have a simple outline of a lizard's body. And we have to imagine that we're looking at this lizard from the underside as we show its anatomical layout. To begin, I just want to point out that a lot of mammals and lizards actually share a very similar anatomical structure. And we'll see that as we go through this list how they compare to other mammals, and especially humans. So to begin, we have the heart. It's placed about where it would be on the chest of a human, except it's a little bit more centered. Below that is the liver, and behind those two are the lungs, and we're going to focus a little bit more on the lungs in a later part of the video. Below that again is the stomach, which goes into a small intestine, which leads to an exit point in between the hind legs, the base of the hind legs of the lizard. And also there we find the bladder. And below the bladder and the exit of the small intestine are two kidneys. And as you can see, this is a very similar layout as would be on a human or many other mammals. And I also wanted to add in this sketch the reproductive organs of the lizards. So to the right we have the ovaries, or an ovary, and to the left we have a testy. And the testy again is a male reproductive organ, and the ovary is a female. And on an actual specimen they'd be on both sides, but just for this sketch I wanted to represent each one and have them on both sides. So a couple things that I also want to note before we move on to the next part is the lack of a vocal cord on the gecko. So this is something that I couldn't draw here because it just isn't part of their anatomical structure. And most lizards actually don't have vocal cords. There are a couple examples of geckos that are able to produce sounds through their mouths, such as a couple of geckos use this in their mating rituals, and there's a species of barking gecko, or a gecko that's called the barking gecko, that uses these sounds that are similar to barking, hence its name, to scare off predators and other threats. And the final thing to note before we move on is that pretty much all lizards have a very slow metabolic rate. We have here a picture of a leopard gecko tail, and as you can see it's very thick and kind of spongy, and that is because it stores a lot of nutrients inside of it. Leopard geckos, being a desert dwelling creature, they do not always have access to a steady source of food, so they require a storage of proteins and nutrients so that over time they can take their energy out of this instead of always having to find food where there really isn't much. And this is also very common with a lot of lizards who live in areas where there isn't always access to a steady food source, and essentially it just is, they have a slow metabolic rate so that they can process the food that they do intake not as quickly as most mammals or humans do, because then they don't always need to be looking for food, even though it would be hard to find some anyway. So to move on, we're going to be looking at the lungs. So here we have the outline of a human lung, and this is just going to represent kind of mammals in general, and the lizard lung. And just to begin, it's easy to see that there's the difference in shape. The lizard lungs are always like a little bit thinner and longer, and the human lungs and mammal lungs are a little bit wider. Each the left and right lung are wider. And another similarity, or asimilarity, is just the layout. They do both are composed of a left and right lung, and use a trachea, which passes the air from the lungs to the mouth, and from the mouth to the lungs. The first difference, though, we are going to be able to point out is what's inside of the lungs. So humans, we have kind of a branching system that end in these alveoli, and this is what allows us to pass the air from our mouths to the lungs and into the lungs, and kind of spreads out through the branching system. Lizards, on the other hand, their lungs are more sponge-like, so it's basically a solid. Each lung is a solid, comprised of little porous holes, and that is how the lizards pass the air in and out of their lungs. And a final note, and this is kind of a big difference, is the diaphragm. So humans, the diaphragm, we have a diaphragm that is positioned directly under our lungs, and essentially it's a muscle that moves up and down and helps us push air in and out of our lungs. Lizards, on the other hand, do not have a true diaphragm, so they lack this muscle that facilitates the passing of air in and out. We have a great example of the mechanism they do use, though, in this video of the leopard gecko. You can see her throat moving up and down slightly, and that is essentially a replacement for the diaphragm that they don't have. By this simple movement, it facilitates the air being passed out of the lungs to the mouth and into the mouth to the lungs. And without this, they might have a little bit more trouble breathing because they don't have this extra muscle that a lot of mammals do. And this is essentially the mechanism they use to make up for that. And finally, we're going to be focusing on the head of a lizard. And as you can tell in the general anatomical layout, we kind of left out what was in the head of the lizard. That's because I wanted to focus on it a little bit later in this video. So to start out, we have a little simple image of a lizard's head, and you have a little sketch of the brain. And this is a lot of many animals, mammals and reptiles alike, pretty much all of them, have brains. So this is something that we could come to expect in an anatomical layout. But a specific, very unique organ to lizards and also reptiles, we can see this in snakes as well, is what we call the vemeronasal organ, or the VNO, and it's also commonly known as the Jacobson's organ. And essentially what this is an organ placed towards the front of the lizard's head, kind of around the nasal area, and connected to the brain by a couple of nerves. And how this works is that through the flicking in and out of the tongue of the lizard, and this is again something we do see on snakes, they suck in a little bit of air into their throats. And this VNO is capable of taking this air and sending a message to the brain, and this message helps the lizards identify danger, safety. They can tell if other lizards are around or what kind of lizard, and they can also identify food sources this way. And this is a very important organ that they have because it does give them a stronger sense of smell that may make up for other deficiencies like poor eyesight. And this is essentially just a very unique organ that is very important to the anatomical study of these creatures, that is not seen in very many other animals, and is mostly unique to reptiles. So thank you for watching the video. This has been a animal anatomy study of the lizard.